Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the stars drift past the main viewing screen. 20 years had passed since humanity first left Earth to explore the galaxy, and those years had been peaceful beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The ship moved quietly through space toward the Outer Rim territories, where new worlds waited to be discovered and new alien friends waited to be made. Dr. Lisa Carter walked onto the bridge, carrying her tablet full of research notes about the various alien species they had encountered. She smiled at Jake and moved to stand beside him at the large window that showed the endless black of space dotted with distant suns. Lisa had spent the last decade studying alien cultures and found them all remarkably advanced in technology, but strangely peaceful in nature. Most species had evolved far beyond the need for warfare and violence. "The Xanthari patrol ships are escorting us again today," Lisa said, pointing to the sleek silver vessels that glided alongside the Liberty like protective guardians. "They really take their peacekeeping duties seriously," Jake nodded and watched. The alien ships with their flowing designs that looked more like art than military vessels. The Xanthari Empire had been humanity's first contact with galactic civilization, and they had welcomed the young human race with open arms. They explained how the galaxy worked and how thousands of species lived together in harmony under their wise guidance. War was a thing of the past, they said, and all conflicts were settled through discussion and compromise. "Hard to believe our ancestors spent so much time fighting each other," Jake said, remembering the history lessons about Earth's violent past. "Good thing we grew out of that phase before we met the neighbors." The bridge door opened and Lieutenant Pete Davis entered. With the daily reports, his job was to monitor communications from Earth and the human colonies that now numbered in the hundreds. Each colony world was a success story of peaceful expansion and cooperation with local alien populations. The Xanthari had helped humanity find suitable worlds and provided technology to make colonization easier and safer. "Sir, we just received confirmation that the New Horizon launched yesterday from Earth with 50,000 settlers bound for the Kepler system," Pete reported. "They should arrive in 6 weeks if everything goes according to schedule." Lisa smiled at the news because the Kepler system was home to a friendly alien species called the Vortani, who had agreed to share their world with human colonists. It was another example of how well things worked when species cooperated instead of fought. The galaxy seemed full of opportunities for peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. Back on Earth, Admiral Richard Hayes sat in his office deep within the military command center, reading reports that most civilians never saw. While the public believed that humanity had largely abandoned its military traditions, Hayes knew better. Hidden away in classified installations around the world, teams of scientists and soldiers continued to develop new weapons and tactics. They called it theoretical research and justified it as necessary preparation for unknown threats, but many civilian leaders considered it a waste of resources. Colonel Amy Rodriguez knocked on Hayes' door and entered carrying a sealed briefcase. She had spent 15 years overseeing what the military called the Omega projects, and her work was known only to a select few within the highest levels of government. While humanity appeared to have embraced peace, Rodriguez and her teams continued to perfect the art of war in secret underground facilities. "The new plasma rifle prototypes are ready for testing," Rodriguez said, placing the briefcase on Hayes' desk. "The targeting systems have improved by 30%, and the power output is now triple what we achieved last year." Hayes opened the briefcase and examined the technical specifications. The weapons inside were unlike anything the peaceful galaxy had seen in centuries. Most alien species had abandoned such technology long ago, viewing it as primitive and unnecessary. The Xanthari themselves used only defensive systems and crowd control devices, since their role as peacekeepers rarely required serious force. "Any word from our deep space monitoring stations?" Hayes asked, referring to a network of hidden sensors that watched for threats beyond known space. The monitoring stations were disguised as research facilities, and even most military personnel didn't know their true purpose. Rodriguez shook her head, but her expression showed concern. Nothing concrete, sir, but some of the stations have detected unusual energy signatures from the void regions beyond the galactic rim. It could be nothing but the patterns don't match any known phenomena. Hayes nodded and closed the briefcase. He had learned long ago that peace was often temporary, and that those who forgot how to fight rarely survived when real threats emerged. While humanity appeared to have joined the galaxy's peaceful civilizations, Hayes and others, like him, maintained the tools and knowledge needed for war. The Liberty continued its journey through space with its crew unaware that their peaceful existence might not last forever. Jake Morrison believed in the galactic order that the Xanthari had created, and Lisa Carter trusted that advanced civilizations had truly evolved beyond violence. They had no reason to suspect that somewhere in the darkness beyond the stars something was moving toward them that would test everything humanity had become. The New Horizon sailed through space toward its destination, carrying 50,000 souls who dreamed of building new lives on a distant world. They traveled through what the Xanthari claimed was the safest region of the galaxy, protected by their ancient wisdom and advanced technology. None of them knew that they were about to become the first to discover that the galaxy's peace was built on lies, and that humanity's greatest test was about to begin. Commander Steve Walsh was drinking coffee in his quarters when the emergency alarm began screaming throughout the UES Liberty. He dropped his cup and ran to the bridge where Captain Jake Morrison stood staring at the main screen with a look of horror that Steve had never seen before. The screen showed debris floating in space and the twisted remains of what had once been a massive colony ship. "Is that the New Horizon?" Steve asked, though he already knew the answer from Jake's expression. The ship that had carried 50,000 human settlers toward a new life was now nothing but scattered metal and plastic drifting in the void. Emergency beacons blinked weakly among the wreckage, and Steve could see several small escape pods floating helplessly in the darkness. Dr. Lisa Carter worked frantically at her station trying to scan the debris field for survivors. Her hands shook as she adjusted the sensors, and her voice cracked when she spoke. "I'm detecting life signs in 12 escape pods, but they're failing fast. We need to get them aboard immediately." Jake ordered the rescue operation, and within an hour they had pulled 137 survivors from the wreckage. The rest of the 50,000 colonists were dead, and their bodies would drift in space forever. Steve helped carry the survivors to the medical bay, where they lay in shock, staring at the ceiling with empty eyes that had seen things no human should witness. Lieutenant Pete Davis tried to interview the survivors, but most of them could only whisper about ships that looked like nothing in any database. They spoke of vessels that seemed alive, with surfaces that moved like skin, and weapons that consumed everything they touched. The ships belonged to something called the Devourers, and they had destroyed the New Horizon in minutes without any warning or communication. One survivor named Carol Martinez grabbed Pete's arm with surprising strength and pulled him close. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her voice was barely audible. "They didn't want to capture us or enslave us. They wanted to eat us. All of us. Everything. They're coming for Earth next." Jake immediately tried to contact the Xanthari escort ships to report the attack, but discovered that all communications had been blocked by some kind of jamming field. The silver alien vessels that had been protecting them for years now seemed to avoid the Liberty and refused to respond to any signals. When Jake ordered the ship to pursue the Xanthari escorts, they accelerated away at impossible speeds. Lisa Carter spent days analyzing the wreckage, and what she found changed everything she believed about the galaxy. The weapons that had destroyed the New Horizon were designed purely for harvesting biomass and resources. They didn't just kill living beings, but processed them into useful materials. The Devourers weren't conquerors or warriors, but farmers who treated entire civilizations as crops to be harvested when ready. The technology is incredibly advanced but completely focused on destruction and consumption, Lisa reported to Jake and the senior staff. These beings don't build or create anything new. They just take what others have made and process it for their own use. They're like a plague that moves from system to system, consuming everything in their path. Steve discovered something even more disturbing when he hacked into the Liberty's classified communications array. Hidden messages from Earth revealed that the Xanthari had been systematically weakening every species' military capabilities for centuries. They convinced each race to disarm by promising protection, but their true purpose was creating defenseless prey for their masters, the DVOURERs. The peaceful galaxy that humanity had joined was not peaceful by choice, but peaceful because the Xanthari had removed everyone's ability to fight back. They had spent generations identifying and cataloging suitable species, then preparing them for harvest by their devourer masters. Humanity was simply the latest crop to be readied for consumption. Jake tried desperately to warn other human colonies, but found that the Xanthari had begun isolating all systems with human presence. Communications were jammed, transportation was blocked, and any ship trying to leave human space was quietly disabled. The trap had been centuries in the making, and now it was finally springing shut. Dr. Carter made another terrible discovery while studying the survivor testimonies. The devourers didn't just appear randomly to harvest suitable species. They had been watching and waiting while the Xanthari prepared their meals. Every peaceful contact between humans and aliens had been reported to the devourer fleets. Every colony location, every population center, every resource depot had been carefully cataloged and marked for future harvest. "We have maybe 6 months before the main devourer fleets arrive," Lisa told Jake during an emergency meeting. "They're not rushing because they don't expect any resistance. As far as they know, we're just another helpless species waiting to be processed." Steve managed to send a coded message to Earth using an old military encryption system that most people had forgotten existed. The message reached Admiral Hayes, who immediately understood that humanity's peaceful expansion had been a carefully orchestrated trap. Within hours, Hayes activated Protocol Omega and began awakening systems that had been hidden for decades. The transformation began slowly at first as military personnel around the galaxy received coded orders to begin Phase 1 operations. Civilian administrators who thought they were running peaceful colonies discovered that their facilities had been designed with hidden purposes. Research stations revealed weapon laboratories. Shipyards began producing military hardware instead of exploration vessels. Mining operations started extracting materials needed for warfare rather than colonization. Jake watched in amazement as his own ship began changing around him. The Liberty had always seemed like a peaceful exploration vessel, but hidden panels opened to reveal weapon systems that had been there all along. The ship's computer systems activated military protocols that Jake didn't know existed. Even the crew quarters could be converted into tactical operations centers within hours. Lieutenant Davis discovered that his communications equipment could tap into a military network that spanned all of human space. The network had been there for years, disguised as routine administrative channels. Through this network, reports began flowing in from every human world as the true scope of humanity's hidden preparations became clear. Commander Walsh realized that the peaceful humans the galaxy had come to know were never real. They had been and carefully maintained illusion designed to hide humanity's true nature from potential threats. While other species had evolved beyond warfare, humans had simply learned to hide their weapons better. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity had never forgotten how to fight, and that their war machine was far more advanced than anyone suspected. The survivors of the New Horizon massacre watched from their medical beds as the Liberty transformed from exploration vessel to warship. They had seen what the Devourers could do, and they knew that the galaxy's ancient peace was about to end. The question now was whether humanity's hidden strength would be enough to survive what was coming, or if they would join the billions of beings who had already been consumed by the galaxy's true masters. The transformation of human space began within hours of Admiral Hayes receiving Commander Walsh's coded message from the Liberty. On Earth, massive underground facilities that had been disguised as research centers suddenly came alive with activity. Colonel Amy Rodriguez stood in the main control room of the largest facility, watching as thousands of her people emerged from their civilian cover identities to begin the work they had trained for their entire careers. Phase 1 activation is complete across all sectors, Rodriguez reported to Hayes through a secure channel. The Omega projects are fully operational and all hidden assets are coming online. Estimated time to full military readiness is 72 hours, Hayes nodded as he watched status reports flowing in from across human space. Mining stations that had spent years extracting raw materials suddenly revealed that they had been stockpiling military-grade metals and rare elements. Civilian shipyards began assembling warships from components that had been manufactured and stored in secret. Most shocking of all, the peaceful colonists themselves were shedding their civilian roles to become the soldiers they had always been trained to be. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of what had been the UES Liberty, watching his ship complete its transformation into something the peaceful galaxy had never seen. The exploration vessel was gone, replaced by a heavily armored warship bristling with weapons that could crack moons. The ship's new name appeared on the hull in bold letters, Liberty Prime. Dr. Lisa Carter stared in amazement at her new laboratory, which had expanded to fill an entire deck of the ship. Hidden panels had opened to reveal equipment for developing biological weapons and analyzing alien physiology for weaknesses. The peaceful xenobiologist was gone, replaced by a military scientist whose job was to find ways to kill things that had never been killed before. I don't understand how all of this was hidden from us, Lisa said to Jake as they toured the transformed ship. How did they manage to keep such massive preparations secret for so long? Jake examined a plasma cannon that had emerged from what he thought was a communication array. The weapon was more advanced than anything he had imagined possible, and its targeting computer already contained detailed information about Devourer ship designs. I think we were never as civilian as we believed. The whole peaceful expansion was probably a military operation from the beginning. Lieutenant Pete Davis discovered that his role as communications officer had been cover for something much more important. His real job was coordinating with a vast intelligence network that had been watching and analyzing every alien species humanity had encountered. The network had files on every Zentari facility, every Devourer sighting, and every potential weakness in their enemies' operations. The first test of humanity's awakened capabilities came sooner than expected. Devourer scout ships appeared at the edge of 3 human colony systems, New Boston Haven and Meridian. The massive bioships dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to find defenseless civilian populations ready for easy harvesting. Instead, they found something that shouldn't have existed in the peaceful galaxy. Commander Steve Walsh now served as tactical officer aboard the Liberty Prime and watched the sensor readings with grim satisfaction. The new Boston defense platforms are powering up, sir. The Devourers are about to get a very unpleasant surprise. What the Devourers had assumed were communication satellites suddenly revealed themselves as orbital weapons platforms capable of destroying capital ships. The merchant vessels in the system shed their civilian disguises to become heavily armed warships. Most importantly, the colonists themselves transformed from peaceful farmers and researchers into coordinated military units that had been training in secret for years. The Battle of New Boston lasted 6 hours and ended with 3 Devourer bioships reduced to expanding clouds of vaporized biomass. The scout force that was supposed to conduct easy reconnaissance found itself facing weapons and tactics that had been specifically designed to counter their biology and technology. Not a single Devourer ship escaped to report back to their main fleet. Dr. Carter analyzed the wreckage of the destroyed bioships and made discoveries that changed her understanding of both the enemy and her own species. The Devourers have been successful because they only fight species that gave up warfare long ago. They have no experience with opponents who understand violence and use it effectively. We're not just different from other galactic species, we're the opposite of what they've become. Similar battles occurred at Haven and Meridian with identical results. 30,000 human colonists at New Boston had held off a Devourer force designed to harvest millions while taking minimal casualties themselves. The victory sent shockwaves through both Devourer and Zentari command structures, who had been assured that humans were as pacified as every other species. Admiral Hayes coordinated the largest military mobilization in human history from his command. Centered deep beneath Earth's surface, every human world revealed manufacturing capabilities that had been hidden for decades. Asteroid mining operations weren't just extracting resources, but had been building the components for thousands of warships. The industrial capacity that had seemed focused on peaceful development was actually the foundation of a war machine unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Colonel Rodriguez supervised the deployment of weapons that violated every peace treaty the galaxy had signed. Kinetic bombardment systems that could shatter planets. Biological weapons designed to target specific alien physiologies. Most terrifying of all, something called the Hellfire Protocol that could turn stars themselves into weapons against enemy fleets, the Liberty. Prime led humanity's first major offensive operation against the Zenthari, surveillance network that had been tracking human expansion for decades. Captain Morrison commanded a battle group of ships that had shed their peaceful disguises to become instruments of controlled destruction. The assault revealed humanity's most frightening characteristic. They learned and adapted faster than any species the galaxy had ever produced. Dr. Carter worked with military intelligence to develop countermeasures, specifically tailored to devour biology. Her research showed that humanity's greatest advantage wasn't their technology or numbers, but their willingness to do whatever survival required, regardless of how brutal it might be. While other species had evolved beyond violence, humans had simply learned to hide their capacity for it. The campaign against the Zenthari network succeeded beyond all projections. In 6 months, humanity dismantled a surveillance system that had taken the Zenthari 3 centuries to build. Hidden human ships appeared throughout the galaxy, destroying monitoring stations and eliminating Zenthari operatives who had spent lifetimes preparing other species for harvest. Steve Walsh commanded one of the strike forces that hit the main Zenthari command facility in the Rigel system. What they found there confirmed humanity's worst fears about the galaxy they had joined. Detailed files on hundreds of species, all cataloged and prepared for eventual consumption. Population centers marked for harvesting. Resource estimates and optimal harvest times. The peaceful galactic community was nothing more than a carefully maintained farm, but the destruction of the Zenthari network came with a terrible realization. The Zenthari had been serving as a buffer between the galaxy and something much worse. Admiral Hayes received reports from deep space monitoring stations that made his blood run cold. Massive devourer fleets were emerging from the void between galaxies. Ships the size of moons carrying weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. Lieutenant Davis intercepted devourer communications that revealed the true scope of what humanity faced. The scout forces that had attacked the outer colonies were just the advanced scouts. The main harvest fleet contained billions of bioships and had been traveling for centuries to reach the galaxy. They had consumed entire civilizations in other galaxies, and now they intended to process every living thing in their new feeding ground. Colonel Rodriguez's final report to Admiral Hayes was brief but terrifying. "Sir, the enemy force approaching our space is larger than our most pessimistic projections. We're not just fighting for human survival anymore. We're fighting for the survival of every living thing in the galaxy, and we may be the only species capable of doing it." The Liberty Prime took position at the edge of human space along with thousands of other warships that had emerged from hidden facilities throughout the colonies. Captain Morrison looked out at the fleet and realized that everything they had done so far was just preparation. The real war was about to begin, and humanity would either prove itself worthy of survival or join the countless species that had already been consumed by the darkness between the stars. The news of humanity's victories against the Devourer Scouts spread through the galaxy like wildfire, causing panic among both the remaining Zenthari forces and the species they had been preparing for harvest. The Zenthari had spent centuries assuring their Devourer masters that every species in the galaxy had been properly pacified and disarmed. The discovery that they had been shepherding a sleeping predator sent shockwaves through command structures that had operated unchallenged for millennia. Admiral Hayes stood in the main strategy room of Earth's military command center watching holographic displays that showed the largest mobilization in human history. Every colony world was revealing manufacturing capabilities that shouldn't have existed. Hidden factories emerged from underground facilities. Civilian populations shed their peaceful roles to become the military units they had always been trained to be. The transformation was happening so quickly that even Hayes was amazed by the scope of what had been hidden. Production reports from all sectors are exceeding projections, Colonel Rodriguez reported as she updated the massive tactical display. The asteroid mining operations have been building warship components for decades. We'll have 15,000 new vessels operational within the next 6 months. And that's just the first wave. The industrial capacity that had seemed focused on peaceful expansion revealed itself as the foundation of a war machine designed to fight enemies that other species couldn't imagine. Mining stations that had extracted resources for civilian purposes were actually supplying military production facilities with materials needed for weapons that violated every peace treaty in galactic history. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the Liberty Prime as it led a battle group toward the Xanthari homeworld deep in the core systems. The ship that had once explored the galaxy in peace was now the flagship of humanity's first major offensive operation. Its crew worked with deadly efficiency that came from years of hidden training and preparation that had been disguised as routine exploration duties. Dr. Lisa Carter worked in her expanded laboratory developing biological weapons, specifically designed to counter devourer physiology. The peaceful xenobiologist was gone, replaced by a military scientist whose research would have horrified the civilized species she had once studied. But survival required tools that civilized species had abandoned, and humanity proved willing to create and use whatever was necessary. The devourer bioships have a critical weakness in their neural control systems, Carter reported to Morrison during a strategy meeting. If we can introduce the right viral agent into their communication networks, we can turn their own ships against each other. It's brutal but effective. Commander Steve Walsh coordinated the attack on the Xanthari surveillance network from the Liberty Prime's tactical center. Hidden human ships appeared throughout the galaxy, destroying monitoring stations that had tracked every species for centuries. The attacks revealed humanity's most terrifying characteristic. They adapted and learned faster than any opponent could anticipate or counter. The Xanthari defenders expected conventional warfare but found themselves facing tactics that violated every rule of civilized combat. Human ships used planets as kinetic weapons. They turned moons into guided missiles. Most shocking of all, they showed no hesitation about sacrificing their own vessels if it meant destroying larger enemy forces. The concept of acceptable losses was completely foreign to species that had evolved beyond violence. Lieutenant Pete Davis monitored communications across the galaxy as news of humanity's offensive spread to every species. The reactions ranged from terror to desperate pleas for protection. Alien governments that had trusted Xanthari guidance for millennia suddenly realized they were defenseless against threats they had forgotten existed. Some species began trying to rebuild military capabilities that had been abandoned centuries ago, but they lacked the time and knowledge needed. The assault on the Xanthari homeworld lasted 3 days and ended with the complete collapse of the empire that had controlled galactic affairs for over 1,000 years. Human forces captured databases containing detailed information about every species in the galaxy, including their weaknesses, populations, and optimal harvest schedules. The files confirmed that the entire galactic community was nothing more than a carefully maintained farm. Dr. Carter's analysis of the captured data revealed something even more disturbing. The Xanthari weren't the original architects of the harvesting system, but had inherited it from previous species who had served the same function. The Devourers had been moving from galaxy to galaxy for millions of years, using local species as farmers to prepare meals for their consumption. The pattern had been repeated countless times across the universe. "We're not fighting a war," Carter told Morrison as they reviewed the captured intelligence. "We're fighting a natural disaster that has been consuming civilization since before our species existed. The Devourers aren't evil, they're just following their nature as ultimate predators. The only way to stop them is to prove that we're more dangerous than they are. Admiral Hayes received reports from deep space monitoring stations that confirmed humanity's worst fears. The main Devourer fleet was massive beyond comprehension. Ships the size of small moons carrying weapons that could sterilize star systems, biological manufacturing facilities that could process entire planets into usable resources. The force approaching the galaxy had consumed hundreds of civilizations and showed no signs of slowing down. Colonel Rodriguez supervised the activation of humanity's most desperate weapon systems. The Hellfire Protocol came online, allowing human forces to trigger stellar events that could destroy entire solar systems. Kinetic bombardment platforms that could shatter planets. Biological weapons designed to corrupt Devourer biotechnology and turn it against itself. The arsenal humanity revealed violated every concept of civilized warfare. The Liberty Prime took position at the edge of known space along with a fleet that grew larger every day as hidden human assets revealed themselves. Captain Morrison looked out at thousands of warships that had emerged from concealed facilities throughout human space. Each vessel carried weapons and crew members that had been preparing for this moment without most of the galaxy ever knowing they existed. Commander Walsh analyzed the tactical situation and realized that everything they had accomplished so far was just the opening move in a conflict that would determine the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. Sir, the Devourer advance forces will reach our outer colonies in approximately 4 months. Their main fleet will arrive 6 months after that. We need to be ready for the largest military engagement in galactic history. Dr. Carter completed her analysis of Devourer biology and presented findings that changed how humanity viewed the coming conflict. These beings have been successful because they've never faced resistance from species that remembered how to fight effectively. They're adapted for harvesting defenseless populations, not for combat against determined opponents. We have advantages they don't understand and can't counter. The final preparations began as Admiral Hayes coordinated defensive positions throughout human space. Every colony world became a fortress. Every asteroid belt became a weapons platform. Every star system became a potential battleground where humanity would prove whether their species deserved to survive, or would join the countless others that had been consumed by the darkness between galaxies. Lieutenant Davis intercepted the final Xanthari transmission before their communication network collapsed completely. The message was addressed to the approaching Devourer fleet and contained a warning that would change everything. The humans are not like other species. They have been preparing for war while pretending to seek peace. You are not approaching a harvest. You are approaching a trap, but the warning came too late. The Devourer fleets were already committed to their approach and couldn't change course even if they wanted to. The collision between humanity's war machine and the galaxy's ultimate predators was inevitable. The only question was whether the galaxy would survive the impact of two forces that had never been designed to coexist in the same universe. The galaxy witnessed something it had never seen before when the main Devourer fleets finally arrived at the edge of human space. Total war waged by beings who remembered what it meant to fight for survival against an enemy that showed no mercy. Admiral Hayes abandoned all pretense of civilized warfare as massive bioships. The size of cities dropped out of hyperspace, intent on processing every living thing in their path. All forces engage immediately, Hayes ordered from his command center deep beneath Earth's surface. Protocol 7 is now active. Every star system is expendable if it means stopping their advance. We are fighting for the survival of all life. In the galaxy, Captain Jake Morrison commanded the Liberty Prime at the center of the largest space battle in galactic history. Thousands of human warships faced millions of Devourer bioships in a conflict that turned entire star systems into graveyards. The Liberty Prime's weapons fired continuously as Morrison coordinated attacks that would have been considered war crimes by any civilized species. Target their manufacturing ships first, Morrison ordered as his tactical display showed the scope of what they faced. If we can stop them from processing captured biomass into new vessels, we might have a chance to outlast them. Dr. Lisa Carter worked in laboratories that had become chambers of horror where captured devourer technology was dissected and turned into weapons against its creators. Her research produced biological viruses that could corrupt biochip neural networks and genetic weapons that targeted devourer reproduction cycles. The work required her to abandon every ethical principle she had once held sacred. The viral weapon is ready for deployment, Carter reported to Morrison over secure channels. It will turn their communication systems against them, but it will also affect any biological matter it contacts. If we use this weapon, we won't be able to return to the affected systems for decades. Commander Steve Walsh coordinated human defensive positions across 17 star systems. As the Devourer advance continued despite horrific losses, each system became a fortress world where civilian populations fought alongside military units using weapons that could crack planets. The distinction between soldier and civilian disappeared as humanity's entire species mobilized for total war. The Battle of Alpha Centauri lasted 8 days and ended with the complete destruction of both the attacking Devourer fleet and the star system itself. Human forces triggered a stellar collapse that vaporized everything within 3 light-years rather than allow the enemy to capture the system's resources. The explosion could be seen from Earth and served as a grim reminder of what humanity would sacrifice to achieve victory. Lieutenant Pete Davis monitored communications from across the galaxy as other species watched the conflict with growing terror. The war between humans and devourers was destroying everything in its path. Entire civilizations evacuated their homeworlds rather than risk being caught between two forces that showed no concern for collateral damage. "Sir, we're receiving surrender offers from 12 different species," Davis reported to Admiral Hayes. "They're offering to serve as our vassals if we'll protect them from the devourers." Hayes barely looked up from the tactical displays showing the current battle zones. "Tell them to stay out of our way. We don't have time to protect anyone who can't protect themselves." Colonel Rodriguez supervised the deployment of the Hellfire Protocol across contested star systems. Human forces turned stars into weapons by triggering controlled solar flares and stellar collapses that destroyed everything within their range, including their own ships and colonies. The tactic was devastatingly effective but required commanders willing to sacrifice their own people to achieve strategic objectives. The Devourer response to humanity's brutal tactics was to increase the size of their attacks. Bioship fleets grew larger as they diverted resources from other galactic harvesting operations. They began using captured alien populations as shields, knowing that most species would hesitate to fire on their own kind. They had not yet learned that humans felt no such hesitation. Dr. Carter's biological weapons achieved their first major success at the Battle of Ross 128, where her viral agent corrupted an entire Devourer battle fleet, causing their ships to attack each other instead of human targets. The sight of massive bioships tearing themselves apart was both terrifying and encouraging, as it proved that humanity's willingness to use any weapon necessary was paying dividends. "The enemy is adapting to our viral attacks," Carter warned Morrison during a strategy meeting. "They're developing countermeasures faster than I anticipated. We need to escalate to weapons they can't adapt to quickly enough." The war reached its most brutal phase at the Terra Nova system, where humanity's most important colony world faced a Devourer fleet numbering over 1 million bioships. The battle became the defining moment of the conflict, as both sides committed everything they had to either capturing or defending the system. Captain Morrison led the defense of Terra Nova with a combined fleet of human warships that had been gathered from across the galaxy. The Liberty Prime anchored the defensive line as wave after wave of Devourer bioships attempted to break through to the planet's surface, where 3 million colonists waited in underground bunkers. "They're trying to exhaust our ammunition supplies," Commander Walsh reported as the battle entered its 15th day. "Their ships keep coming even when they're taking massive casualties. They don't care about losses as long as they can wear us down." The breakthrough came when Dr. Carter's team successfully deployed a weapon that targeted the quantum entanglement systems Devourers used to coordinate their fleets. The weapon severed the connection between bioships and their command vessels, causing massive formations to lose cohesion and attack randomly. The effect spread through the enemy fleet like a plague, turning their greatest strength into a devastating weakness. "The quantum disruption weapon is working beyond our projections," Carter reported, as Devourer formations began collapsing throughout the Terra Nova system. "Their entire command structure is falling apart. They can't coordinate attacks anymore." The Battle of Terra Nova ended after 17 days with the complete annihilation of the Devourer attack fleet. Not a single enemy vessel escaped to report back to their main force. The victory came at a terrible cost, as humanity lost nearly half of their assembled fleet, but it proved that the galaxy's ultimate predators could be defeated by opponents willing to match their ruthlessness. Admiral Hayes received casualty reports that would have broken the spirit of any civilized species. Entire human colonies had been sacrificed to achieve strategic objectives. Star systems had been rendered uninhabitable to deny them to the enemy. Millions of human lives had been lost, but the Devourer advance had been stopped. Colonel Rodriguez presented the final statistics of humanity's war effort to Hayes in a brief report that captured the scope of what they had accomplished. "Sir, we have eliminated 67% of the Devourer forces that entered our galaxy. Our industrial capacity has been damaged but not destroyed. We can continue fighting for as long as necessary." The news of Terra Nova's victory spread throughout the galaxy, carried by refugee ships and surviving communication networks. Other species began to understand that humanity hadn't just awakened their war machine, but had become something beyond what the galaxy had thought possible. They weren't just fighting the Devourers, they were matching and exceeding their capacity. For total destruction. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Liberty Prime, looking out at the debris field that had once been the Terra Nova system's outer planets. The battle had been won, but the cost was almost incomprehensible. Humanity had proven they could defeat the galaxy's ultimate predators, but only by becoming something equally terrifying. "Sir, we're receiving reports from Deep Space Monitoring stations," Lieutenant Davis announced. "The remaining Devourer fleets are withdrawing from the galaxy. They're returning to the void between stars." But even in victory, humanity had changed into something that the peaceful galaxy could never accept. They had awakened capabilities that couldn't be put back to sleep. The war machine that had saved all life in the galaxy would never be able to return to the peaceful exploration that had once defined human expansion among the stars. 6 months after the Battle of Terra Nova, the last Devourer stronghold fell to human forces in the Andromeda approach, where massive bioships had tried to establish a foothold for future operations. Admiral Hayes watched from his command center as the final enemy vessels were destroyed by weapons that had redefined what warfare meant in a supposedly civilized galaxy. Victory had come at a price that no one had anticipated when the conflict began. "All Devourer forces have been eliminated from this galaxy, sir," Colonel Rodriguez reported as the tactical displays finally showed green across all monitored sectors. "Our deep space monitoring stations confirm that their remaining fleets have retreated beyond our sensor range. The immediate threat is over, but victory brought complications that no human leader had prepared for. The other species that had survived. The war now faced a reality they couldn't accept or understand. Humanity had become the dominant military power in the galaxy, with weapons and capabilities that made every other civilization helpless by comparison. The peaceful balance that had existed for millennia was gone forever. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Liberty Prime, watching as alien ships approached under flags of surrender. Representatives from dozens of species had come to negotiate with the humans who had saved them from consumption, but now terrified them beyond measure. The Liberty Prime had become a symbol of humanity's transformation from peaceful explorers to galactic overlords. "The Vortani delegation is requesting terms for their surrender," Commander Steve Walsh reported as he monitored the incoming communications. "They're offering to submit to human authority in exchange for protection and autonomy over their internal affairs." Dr. Lisa Carter had completed her final analysis of what humanity had become during the war, and her conclusions were as disturbing as they were accurate. The rapid military evolution had fundamentally changed humans as a species. The capacity for total warfare that had saved the galaxy couldn't be simply turned off or forgotten. Humanity would never again be the peaceful explorers they had once appeared to be. "We've crossed a line that we can't uncross," Carter explained to Morrison during one of their last meetings aboard the ship. "The other species see us as we really are now. We're not their saviors, we're their new masters, and they know it. The question is what we do with that power." Lieutenant Pete Davis intercepted communications from across the galaxy as the surviving species struggled to understand their new reality. Some alien governments were collapsing as populations demanded protection from the humans who had proven capable of destroying star systems. Others were desperately trying to rebuild military capabilities that had been abandoned for centuries. "Sir, we're receiving formal requests for human military protection from 47 different species," Davis reported to Admiral Hayes. "They're afraid that other threats might emerge now that the galactic balance has been disrupted. They want our guarantee that we'll defend them from future dangers." The decision about humanity's future role in the galaxy fell to Admiral Hayes and the small group of leaders who had guided the war effort. They could establish an empire using their military supremacy to rule as the Xanthari once had. They could withdraw from galactic affairs and let other species fend for themselves. Or they could choose a third option that would define humanity's legacy for millennia to come. "We didn't fight this war to become conquerors," Hayes announced during the final strategy meeting of the conflict. "But we also can't pretend that things can go back to the way they were. The galaxy needs guardians, not rulers. We'll provide protection, but we won't govern." Captain Morrison received orders that would fundamentally change his role from military commander to something unprecedented in galactic history. The Liberty Prime would become the flagship of humanity's new Guardian fleet, patrolling the galaxy to ensure that no future threat could arise. It was a responsibility that would never end because the peace it protected would always be fragile. "Our mission is to watch and wait," Morrison explained to his crew as they prepared for their new role. "We'll monitor every system, maintain defensive positions, and respond to any threat that might emerge. The galaxy will be peaceful because we have the strength to keep it that way." Commander Walsh coordinated the deployment of human forces throughout the galaxy as defensive positions were established in every major system. The operation required thousands of ships and millions of personnel who would spend their lives maintaining vigilance against threats that might never come. It was the price of the peace they had fought to preserve. Dr. Carter established research facilities on a dozen worlds to continue monitoring for potential threats while developing new defensive technologies. Her work would focus on preventing future conflicts rather than winning them, but she knew that humanity's capacity for war would always lurk beneath the surface of their guardian role. "We've become something unique in the galaxy," Carter noted in her final report. "We're a species that chose to be protectors instead of conquerors despite having the power to rule everything. Whether future generations will make the same choice remains to be seen." The new order established itself quickly. As alien species accepted human oversight in exchange for guaranteed protection, trade routes reopened under human escort, research continued under human supervision. The galaxy returned to something resembling peace, but everyone understood that it was peace maintained by the threat of overwhelming force rather than genuine harmony. Lieutenant Davis coordinated communications between human guardian stations and alien governments as the new system found its balance. His reports showed that most species were adapting to human oversight better than expected, but there were signs of resentment building among populations that had once governed themselves. "Some of the younger alien generation are calling us the Iron Guardians," Davis reported during a routine briefing. "They've never known galactic warfare and they see our presence as oppressive rather than protective. This could become a problem in the future." Admiral Hayes established the Guardian Protocol that would govern human behavior throughout the galaxy for generations to come. Human forces would maintain defensive positions but would not interfere in local affairs unless threats to galactic security emerged. It was a delicate balance between protection and freedom that would require constant adjustment. Colonel Rodriguez supervised the construction of monitoring stations throughout the galaxy that would watch for signs of emerging threats. The network was more comprehensive than anything the Zenthari had built and was designed to detect problems before they could grow large enough to threaten galactic stability. Captain Morrison took the Liberty Prime on its first patrol mission. Through the core systems where the largest alien populations lived under human protection. Children on alien worlds watched the massive warship pass overhead, knowing that it carried weapons that could destroy their entire planet but also protected them from things that were far worse. The next generation will grow up never knowing war, Morrison observed as he watched alien cities functioning normally despite the human military presence. But they'll also grow up knowing that peace exists only because we maintain the strength to enforce it. The final scene played out as deep space sensors detected new signals from beyond the galactic rim where unknown civilizations might be watching. The aftermath of the Devourer War, Admiral Hayes reviewed the data and issued orders that would define humanity's role for the foreseeable future. Expand the Guardian network, strengthen the monitoring systems, and prepare for whatever might come next. Dr. Carter's last personal log entry captured the reality of what humanity had become. We saved the galaxy by becoming something it had never seen before. We're not conquerors or destroyers, but we're not the peaceful explorers we once pretended to be either. We're the guardians of a peace that exists only because we remember how to wage war better than anyone else. The galaxy sleeps safely because we never sleep soundly. The Liberty Prime took position at the edge of known space where it would watch and wait for threats that might never come. Captain Morrison understood that his ship and crew had become symbols of humanity's transformation from explorers seeking friendship among the stars to guardians maintaining order through the promise of controlled violence. The war machine had awakened, and it would never truly sleep again.